So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the most recent of the Al Tamimi Construction Infrastructure Team's webinars on current themes in construction law in the GCC jurisdictions. And the one that we're doing today is specifically in relation to Abu Dhabi, a market which in many ways is slightly neglected against some of the others in the GCC region. We're in a fortunate position in Al Tamimi that we have a fully good full service firm in Abu Dhabi, and in particular we've got two of my colleagues in Abu Dhabi, Ewan Lloyd and Laith Al-Ali. The three of us are going to be speaking to you today about three different themes. We're going to be taking those in order, and it will be a fairly standard format. If you could just move on to the next slide, please, which is Ewan talking about general themes in relation to construction in the Abu Dhabi market trends, Laith talking about price escalation, and myself just doing something on dispute resolution in Abu Dhabi to finish up. Probably speaking for about 40 minutes or so, and then there will be an opportunity for questions at the end. Certainly, if any of you do have any questions as we're speaking, put them into the chat box in the normal way, and we'll look to pick them up as we sweep up at the end. So, on no further ado, move on to Ewan and the first topic: general market trends. Ewan.
It's actually Laith Al-Ali's doing the first part, so I'll hand over to Laith. I'll be on next.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Right. Thanks, Andrew, for the introduction. Thank you all for joining us today. So as Andrew mentioned, I think invariably when we discuss the construction market in the UAE, the focus often is on developments in Dubai, mainly, to be honest. And that's understandable to a degree, given obviously recent events such as Expo 2020, which have really meant that Dubai is never far away from the headlines. But in this webinar, however, the focus of my discussion will, as we've said, be on examining some of the key market trends and activity in the Abu Dhabi construction market. So next slide, please. So it goes without saying, really, that COVID has, over the past 2 years, unsurprisingly, had a significant negative impact on UAE construction market activity. The pandemic, coupled with the reduced demand for oil and the impact that had on revenue, resulted in an estimated 4.8% decline in the UAE construction sector in 2020, rebounding with growth of approximately 4.4% in 2021. And the UAE construction market is projected to reach a value of approximately $133.5 billion US dollars by the year 2027, and a projected compound annual growth rate of around 4.5% by that time. And the Abu Dhabi market is expected to contribute quite significantly towards that significant market growth. The Abu Dhabi government have in recent years introduced various initiatives with a view to enhancing, I think, the Emirates' ability to really secure sustainable long-term economic growth beyond its traditional oil revenue base. And this is having and will likely continue to have a positive impact on construction activity in various sectors within the Emirate, as we'll come on to discuss shortly. So what general trends and activity are we currently seeing, and what can we continue to expect to see in Abu Dhabi in 2022 and beyond? Well, next slide, please. There are four key areas, I think, that will continue to heavily influence and have an impact on construction market activity in Abu Dhabi. Each of these have a role in themselves and will be relatively significant, as we'll come on to see. Tourism and hospitality being one, focus on energy and infrastructure, residential development, despite sometimes what we've been hearing occurring in other Emirates, and digitization and the impact that is likely to have on how the construction industry matures and develops in the coming few years. Next slide, please. So the tourism and hospitality sector is, I think, and will continue to be one of the main pillars of the Abu Dhabi economy. The UAE government's speedy vaccine rollout, its robust response to the pandemic, and subsequent quite prompt easing of restrictions has really allowed the tourism and hospitality sector to open up far quicker than in many other countries. And as a result, the country and indeed Abu Dhabi in particular have been able to benefit, I think, from that strong pent-up demand for both commercial and leisure travel, with the increased potential for inbound tourism likely to continue to drive, I think, construction activity in Abu Dhabi for the remainder of 2022 and beyond. Under the Abu Dhabi Plan 2030, an initiative which was introduced by the Abu Dhabi government designed to really help respond to current and future development needs. The Emirate is planning to attract almost 8 million tourists between now and annually between now and 2030. And in order to obviously serve this huge inflow of tourists, I think there will be a continued focus on really developing the Emirates tourism, cultural, entertainment, and hotel assets so that they can continue to cater for this increase in demand. I think just take one look at the Abu Dhabi skyline. From where we are, we can see a number of projects in the Tamimi office, and it just doesn't take you too long to see just how active we are within this space within Abu Dhabi. On Saadiyat Island, for example, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi Museum, which is a project with an estimated value of over $1 billion US, is currently under construction. I can see that from where we are now. And it's the largest of the 4 Guggenheim museums that are located all over the world, and it's set to really enhance Abu Dhabi's presence and, as both a regional and global centre for arts and culture. I believe it was originally due to be completed and to welcome visitors in 2012. It was then delayed until 2017, but is now expected to open its doors in 2025. Saadiyat Island's cultural district is also set to be the home of the new Zayed National Museum, which will tell the story of the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan, and it's apparently set for completion later this year. As is also the Abrahamic Family House, which will be a religious establishment where educating visitors on tolerance and within the religious sphere, and housing actually on site a mosque, church, and synagogue. So as I said, that will also complete later this year, further cementing, I think, Abu Dhabi and indeed Saadiyat Island's presence within the cultural space. In March of this year, the Department of Culture and Tourism unveiled plans for the Natural History Museum of Abu Dhabi, and that will be located again on Saadiyat Island in its cultural district. However, it's due to be completed in 2025. Further afield, slightly out beyond Saadiyat Island, we have construction ongoing at the SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, a 3 billion dirham project located on Yas Island, but it's set to start welcoming visitors later this year, I believe. And then also we have what's referred to as the Yas Bay project. This is a 12 billion dirham development comprising various tourism and hospitality venues, some of which have already been handed over, such as the Etihad Arena and Hilton Hotel. And it's also set to feature multiple restaurants, cafes, retail outlets, a cinema, beach club, and so on. So I think it's therefore really quite clear, just from some of the ongoing and pipeline projects that I've mentioned, that there is clearly a drive within Abu Dhabi to ensure that there's a robust and a sustained period of post-pandemic economic growth in order to really help offset, I think, the negative economic impact of the past 2 years. So I think the Abu Dhabi government will really continue to invest heavily in developing the tourism and hospitality sector and its portfolio really of tourism and cultural assets well beyond this year. Next slide, please. Construction activity within the energy and infrastructure sector in Abu Dhabi is also, I think, expected to grow over the next decade. Investment in utilities infrastructure is anticipated in order to really help boost, I think, electricity generation capacity in order to meet increasing demand and really enhance, I think, UAE's water security and help diversify the economy away from its reliance on oil. The growth in energy and utilities infrastructure will also be driven by the expansion of, I think, water and renewable energy capacity in line with the pressing water scarcity that we're seeing in the UAE and the government's low carbon energy drive, an agenda which has been enshrined and included in what's referred to as the UAE Energy Strategy 2050. So this 2050 strategy really aims to increase the contribution of clean energy in the total energy mix from 25% to 50% by the year 2050 and reduce the carbon footprint of power generation by over 70% with an estimated saving of 700 billion dirhams by 2050. It also seeks to increase consumption efficiency within the population amongst individuals and corporates by 40%. During COP26 in Glasgow last year, the Abu Dhabi Department of Energy really reiterated its commitment to helping accelerate the UAE's sustainable economic growth while supporting its ambitious net zero strategy within the 2050 agenda. And the Department of Energy really outlined 9 existing and planned projects focused on clean energy generation, from solar and nuclear sources through to electrification of the water production system, through reverse osmosis technology, and also other policies and energy efficiency measures which will combine really help Abu Dhabi achieve its clean energy targets. There are various projects on the horizon, including at the moment Abu Dhabi's 2 gigawatt Al Dhafra solar PV project, which is due for completion by 2023, as well as 2 waste to energy plants that are planned in Abu Dhabi and Al Ain. I also think hydrogen is expected to play a key role in the UAE and indeed Abu Dhabi's energy diversification strategy, with a number of important and key Abu Dhabi entities involved in that, namely Mubadala, ADNOC, and ADQ, which together comprise the Abu Dhabi Hydrogen Alliance. And they're looking really to focus on establishing the Emirate as a global hub for low carbon, green and blue hydrogen. The important role of hydrogen in construction market activity, I think, was recently underlined by the announcement earlier this month that land had been allocated in Kizad, the Khalifa industrial zone of Abu Dhabi, for a planned green hydrogen and green ammonia project. That's a 3.7 billion dirham project, which will integrate green hydrogen and ammonia technologies. And it will also feature an 800 megawatt solar PV plant that will be used to power hydrogen and ammonia, well, in order to help really power that production process. In addition, ADNOC recently announced earlier this year the commencement of a competitive process to evaluate and select a developer to participate in the development of a $2.5 billion large-scale seawater treatment and transmission pipeline. So no doubt more information on that will follow in the coming months. I think it's also probably worth mentioning at this stage the emphasis emphasis on clean energy, on sustainability will probably permeate through to the procurement process. Where we may see a growing kind of focus on suppliers and stakeholders really buying into this clean energy strategy and mindset, and really trying to show and evidence within their tender documents for really their commitment to things like use of renewable energy, the use of environmentally sustainable materials, and also the sustainable possibly management of waste when actually executing construction projects. I think that will increasingly feature within tender documents in the coming years. I think it's also separately worth just briefly touching on improvements in the transport infrastructure space, which I think will continue to be another key area or contributor towards the construction activity in the Abu Dhabi market. Transportation and road infrastructure development, I think, continues to be key in a country where there is a heavy reliance on cars and motor vehicles, in order to help obviously meet the growing demands of citizens, residents, and obviously visitors and tourists, as I mentioned earlier. Significant transport infrastructure projects in the pipeline within Abu Dhabi include the ongoing $11 billion Etihad Rail project, which recently in March of this year completed its phase of linking the track between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, as well as the much talked about $5.9 billion Hyperloop project, which will be linking also Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Next slide, please. So residential development is also, I think, another area of focus. The development of the housing sector is actually being actively encouraged by the Abu Dhabi government, and therefore I don't think really should be overlooked, despite some of what we've been hearing, I think, in the press. Accordingly, I think the Abu Dhabi market will pose a significant area both within the residential sphere. The Abu Dhabi master plan envisages over 28,000 new properties being constructed by 2023. In 2021, in fact, the residential sector was the highest performer within construction asset awards. I think, as I say, this trend is really expected to continue during 2022 and beyond. We've seen announcements recently in regarding a number of new residential development projects, which will, I think, as I say, continue to bolster construction activity in this space. There was the recent announcement of a new Louvre Abu Dhabi residence, which will be on Saadiyat Island, inspired by the new Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum, and which will comprise 400 apartments. It's due to be completed, I believe, in 2025. Earlier this month, also Al Dar Properties, Abu Dhabi's largest developer, acquired 6.2 million square meters of land on Saadiyat Island as part of its plan to develop a 15 billion mega dirham mixed-use project development, housing 2,700 residential units, most of which will be villas capable of housing to 15,000 residents. Construction on that project for Al Dar is expected to begin during the second half of 2022 and scheduled for completion by 2026. And then we have on Jubail Island as well, slightly further out, which sits between Saadiyat and Yas, construction ongoing of an upmarket residential community with homes of more than 5,000 residents, with the first phase of villas due to be handed over by Q4 of 2023. Next slide, please. Finally, I think really the pandemic has challenged many of the traditional processes and platforms in the construction sector. I think local developers and stakeholders, not just in Abu Dhabi, but across the region, are now increasingly seeking efficiencies within the construction procurement process. Technological and digitally integrated processes, I think, are needed and will be seen as required in the planning, staffing, monitoring and delivery of construction projects to really ensure that they can be delivered on time and on budget. Companies, therefore, I think, which cater to the delivery of digitized, innovative technology solutions will find, I think, increased opportunities in the market as the digitization of the sector continues to really be an area of increased focus for stakeholders. Recent trends indicate there has and will continue to be growing demand for technologies such as BIM, building information modeling, augmented reality, use of drones in construction, 360-degree video capturing technology, and 3D scanning and printing technology. The UAE's Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure actually unveiled back in 2021 its National Guide for Smart Construction, which aims to really develop, I think, basic drivers of policies and targets that are aimed at stimulating the development of the construction sector, and contains key elements for smart construction, which all parties really should be alive to and take note of in order to really help improve the construction process. And this includes emphasizing the importance of employing modern, innovative technologies in the design and construction process, including, it mentions, the use of BIM. So this, I think, is an important signal of intent, I think, by the UAE government in terms of how it sees the construction procurement process and indeed the industry developing in the coming years. However, I do think that the digitization of the industry in Abu Dhabi and elsewhere in the region will probably come with its challenges. One such challenge is the ability, actually, of the value chain to really keep up with technological change as and when they are made. And secondly is with respect to the need for retooling, upskilling and really training of personnel. Construction companies will, I think, really have to invest in training their workforce in order to really ensure that the benefits of digitalization can be leveraged really for the benefit of all industry stakeholders. It's therefore, I think, important that at this stage and going forward, supply chains really do take proactive measures and steps in order to consider how they can best adapt to some of these changing technology trends, so that they can be incorporated where possible into the procurement process and indeed the project execution phase. I think how successful the Emirate of Abu Dhabi in particular will be in this regard remains to be seen. However, there's no doubt in my mind that it will be a leading player within the industry and in developing the technological aspect of the construction industry for many years to come. So that really brings me to the end of this part of the webinar. I'm going to hand the floor to my colleague Yuan, who will take you through a discussion on price escalation provisions. Thanks all for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, Laith. That's very useful and very informative. And I think the outlook for Abu Dhabi from a construction perspective is pretty good, pretty buoyant, a lot of opportunities. And I suppose from my own perspective, I'm seeing a lot of lot of kind of confidence in the market. I think, as was inevitably the case, a lot of projects were put on hold on account of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hopefully, kind of COVID-19 is behind us, and confidence is returning, and so projects which were put on hold are being recommenced now, and also there's a lot of appetite for new developments along the lines of the projects that Laith kind of highlighted. I'm seeing in particular a lot of growth in the manufacturing and processing plant areas. But of course, just move on to the next slide, please. Of course, there are some challenges in the market. It's always the case. We talk about anything to do with construction. It's always it's a high risk area, and there are plenty of issues which you could discuss and highlight as a particular challenge. But I think right now what's topical is the issue of price escalation and inflation. And the issue of inflation is not by no means unique to the Abu Dhabi construction market. Just got to go to a supermarket and buy some groceries or put some petrol in your car, and you can see clear evidence of the price escalations and inflations, and which is taking hold. And and of course it's taking hold on the construction industry. And look, I'm by no means an economist, but I did a little bit of research as to what the causes of this onset of inflation may be, and there seem to be kind of various kind of causes which have come together and in some ways created a perfect storm. And so just a couple of the issues which are worth kind of highlighting are, first of all, you've got the COVID-19 pandemic, and on account of the additional kind of COVID-19 kind of measures which have brought in that added cost to produce materials, and so these costs were passed on to the end users. Of course, there was various production interruptions, the factories closed, had to go down to reduced capacity, and that kind of brought about scarcity, and you get scarcity, prices do rise. And although I said a few minutes ago that hopefully COVID-19 is behind us, just look at China right now, and China right now has got some fairly draconian lockdowns, and so I suspect there will be issues arising out of that going forward. And then of course there'll be some other issues. So there've been various extreme weather conditions in different parts of the world, and the current conflict in Ukraine. So these things have kind of come together, and and of course Nick and me may also refer to or characterize what you may call a degree of profiteering as maybe exacerbated the issue. But the bottom line is there's been a widespread and dramatic increases of the cost of commodities in the construction sector. So look at the cost of steel, concrete, shipping, labour costs have gone up, fuel, they've all gone up. And look, and according to the analysts, these kind of price escalations are predicted to remain in place this year. They may start coming down next year. They are predicted to come down next year, but of course these predictions are fairly heavily caveated. But anyway, look, that's the situation we're in right now. And I suppose the next question is why are price escalations relevant from a construction from an Abu Dhabi construction market perspective? And I suppose the answer to that is because the vast majority of construction contracts entered into in Abu Dhabi and the UAE and across the GCC are typically for fixed lump sum amounts. And this kind of principle is enshrined in the UAE Civil Code. So there's an article 871, and it says if a Makwala contract or works contract is made on the basis of an agreed plan in consideration for a lump sum payment, the contractor may not demand any increase over the lump sum as may arise after the execution of the plan. So you've got this residual or this enshrined principle that if you sign a lump sum contract price, you're pretty much bound by it. And look, you can say, given the prevalence of lump sum contracting in the UAE, well, that's fair enough. Contractors can price this risk. They can build buffers into their fixed lump sum contract prices, and that they can. But the fact of the matter is the industry is hugely competitive. In order to win a job, you got to put in a very economically viable price. And if you are the preferred bidder or the contractor in line to be selected, invariably you're then asked to submit your best and final offer, or sometimes after that your very best and conclusive offer. So there's a lot of kind of pressure on contractors in terms of price to win jobs, and this kind of erodes any buffer which may be kind of built in to address price escalations and inflation. Next slide, please. So that's the situation. And so the next kind of thing I want to next issue I want to discuss is what can you do about it if you are a contractor, if you have signed a fixed lump sum contract price and you are hit by cost escalations. And so the answer to that is, the principle of freedom of contract prevails in Abu Dhabi, and fundamentally the contract is king. And so what kind of redress you may have or may not have will be found in the contract. And I know there's, you do hear people saying it's manifestly unfair for the contractor to shoulder the burden of cost escalations and these kind of things. Unfortunately, the concept of unfairness is not really a tangible legal concept upon which you can bring a coherent claim under Abu Dhabi law. And so, of course, so like I say, it's necessary. The first port of call, like anything else, is to look at the contract. And of course, different contracts have different forms of risk allocation. They all say different things depending on how it's been negotiated. But by way of kind of benchmarks and by way of examples, I've used FIDIC forms. And so you look at a FIDIC 99 red or yellow book, they actually have a clause 13.8, which allows parties to introduce a cost escalation clause. And basically how it works is the parties are invited to FIDIC proposes a formula, and then the parties kind of populate that formula in the appendix to tender. And very, very simplistically, it's a case of the parties agreeing a threshold. So if the cost of a material or a commodity exceeds a particular threshold, then that triggers the cost escalation clause, and then the cost is adjusted in accordance with an index, and that's how you get an increase in the cost of that particular material or commodity. But if that clause is present in your contract, and you're a contractor seeking to rely on this clause 13.8, that's only part of the story. So if you are invoking that clause, you then have to kind of link it with clause 20.1, which is the claims process, the claims procedure under the contract. And so typically, unless you bring notice of the claim within 28 days, your claim will be time barred and your claim will be lost. And then once you've actually brought the claim, you've subsequently got the evidential burden of actually substantiating that claim. So demonstrating that the prices in the industry have increased and that the indices in the formula are applicable. By way of further example, just moving on to the FIDIC Silver Book, which is a EPC contract. As you'd expect, an EPC contract has got a more restrictive approach to cost escalations on account of the nature of that form of procurement. Although the FIDIC Silver Book does invite parties to insert their own cost escalation clause in the particular conditions, although FIDIC doesn't actually offer a formula in this under this form of contract. But although these clauses are found in standard form FIDIC contracts, I suppose in my experience, at least in the industry, clause 13.8 is invariably deleted because fundamentally, employers want uncertainty of cost. They take the view that the contractor is best placed to manage the supply chain, and maybe that is true. But then but considering what I just said about the competitive nature of contracting and tendering, maybe that's somewhat of a fallacy. And then the other thing as well, just to kind of bear in mind, if you do adopt a FIDIC cost escalation clause, it allows for costs to go up and also to fall as well. So, you know, if you are a contractor, you have got such a clause, got to be a little bit kind of careful about what you wish for, because, you know, if these economic predictions are right and prices do fall next year, that may result in contract price falling. That's something else kind of, you know, worth bearing in mind. Next slide, please. So assuming you know, there's no kind of, you know, clear cost escalation clause under the contract. So, you know, as is typical, the parties have agreed to delete clause 13.8. Look, I suppose all's not lost if you are a contractor looking to claim additional money or compensation arising out of cost escalations. But the relief which may be available to you, the additional costs which may be available, the relief isn't holistic, it's a lot more sporadic and looked at on a case-by-case basis. So I'll put down a few examples here. So just going back to the FIDIC 99 example. So under the FIDIC 99 contracts, the contractor is entitled to claim, you know, costs in certain circumstances. So he's got relief events, and so a relief event may be, you know, if he receives late instructions, or if the employer suspends works at the employer's convenience, or if there are unforeseen ground conditions which cause delay and additional cost. In that situation, you know, FIDIC allows the contractor to recover his actual costs which is incurred arising out of this relief event. That would allow the contractor to claim the actual market costs in that situation. Also, you know, variations may be applicable. So if a variation is instructed, there could be a way to claim market costs. But the reality is the variations are probably linked to a price BOQ, and the BOQ is likely to have, you know, fixed prices in there. So that may not be particularly helpful. And the other thing as well is you maybe kind of, you know, claim costs for breach of contract. And so, for example, there's an employer event of prevention under the construction contract that could lead to a damages claim. And if the contractor claims damages under UAE law, you claim your directly incurred losses arising out of that breach, and so that could open the door to bringing a claim for the actual market costs. But then, of course, you know, all this is down to the contractor to substantiate and demonstrate what these costs should be, and the burden of proof very much sits with the contractor. So, maybe so what I've just said, it's without a clear kind of cost escalation clause in the contract, the relief which is available will be a little bit piecemeal. It won't apply across the board. It'll only apply in certain circumstances, as and when you can claim additional costs under the contract. And I suppose that kind of brings me on to what's the position under UAE law. And under UAE law, I think the key thing to look at is Article 249 of the UAE Civil Code, which is a mandatory provision. And that means that parties can't contract out of it. It's going to apply regardless. And what this clause says is that if exceptional circumstances of a public nature occur which could not have foreseen and render performance of an obligation oppressive, so as to threaten the obligor with grave loss, the judge or arbitrator has got the discretion to reduce the oppressive obligation to a reasonable level if justice so requires. And so that all sounds very good in theory, but if you break it down, it's pretty difficult to actually invoke this kind of relief in practice. So just kind of going through the different parts of Article 249 and applying this to inflation. So number one, the first test, an exceptional circumstance. Is inflation an exceptional circumstance? it's debatable. Inflation is a fact of life. It could be argued. Maybe this is more severe than has been the case previously, but that's a slightly grey area because people do know about inflation. Number two, inflation is of a public nature. I think that box is satisfied. Unforeseeable. I think right now it's very difficult to say inflation is unforeseeable, but supposing you signed the contract back in 2019 before COVID hit, yeah, maybe these levels of inflation are unforeseeable. The next part is quite interesting in the reference to loss. And so, inflation could erode profit margins. If you're a contractor and you thought, okay, I'll get a profit margin of 10% on this project, but in reality, because of inflation and the rising cost of materials, your profit margin falls to 5%. That's a loss of profit, not an actual loss you've suffered. So I think it's very difficult to claim loss of profit under this provision. And then the other issue as well, the way the article is drafted, it's looking forward. It's looking at relief which may be available in the future. And the idea, when the Civil Code was drafted, the idea was that a contractor would petition a court ahead of time rather than retrospectively. And so there is an argument that this relief is only available in these circumstances, but there is some jurisprudence from an Egyptian perspective, in particular, which would allow the equivalent of Article 249 to be invoked retrospectively. But look, I mean, 249 also comes with pretty kind of heavy health warning in that it does go against the principle of freedom of contract, and the parties are fundamentally bound by what they've agreed under the contract. And the courts and arbitral tribunals are quite reluctant to amend what was freely agreed between two experienced contracting parties. Although not relevant in the UAE, if you are contracting in some other jurisdictions, maybe worth looking at the procurement law or other laws. And just quickly, by reference to Saudi, the Saudi procurement law in respect of government contracts allows for escalations if the cost of materials have increased by more than 10%, and they're going to cause more than a 3% increase in the actual overall contract price of the effective contract, then it's possible to claim an escalation under the Saudi procurement law. There are comparable procurement laws in other jurisdictions in which we deal. My final two bullet points, I'll just mention very quickly because I don't think they're particularly relevant or helpful. The first one is, sometimes if the cost of a material has increased, you can maybe look at viable substitutes or alternative materials. But I think in this context, it's not really relevant. Inflation hits across the board. It's very difficult to find any alternatives. And then the final point is just if you are a main contractor, for example, or a subcontractor, you're engaging subcontractors, and you signed up to a fixed lump sum contract price, you want to make sure that your supply chain are similarly obliged and haven't got any kind of cost escalation clauses under their contracts. That could put you in a pretty difficult situation. I'm conscious of the time, and so I'll just pass the floor on to Andrew, who will be discussing dispute resolution, which probably kind of flows on to this issue of cost escalation, because it can be a little bit contentious. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Ewan. Actually, just a bit of a link. Quite interestingly, a good few years ago, I was involved in a project in Kazakhstan, and my client from Central Europe asked me to advise on a Latin concept that potentially might have some sort of relevance in the context of a commercial code country or countries such as the GCC, and this is something called rebus sextantibus. And as you may or may not know, obviously the codes from Egypt that then have come into the GCC are very much based on the Napoleonic codes. And there, the Civil Code of France did have some idea that insofar as the circumstances changed, so the bargain was somewhat different from what the parties had anticipated, that a party could actually then claim additional cost. Now, it hasn't really developed as as a theme in private contract law, although certain decisions I think in particular in Spain, have meant that there is this sort of safety net outside of contract law. Certainly, there's no safety net in the hard-nosed mercantile background to the common law of England. But yeah, undoubtedly, there is what it says in your contract, and that there may be something that you can rely upon within the civil codes, whether it's the specific provisions that have been referred to by you and in the GCC, or if you're contracting in other regions in French-speaking Africa, for example, or other countries in the former Soviet Union, the CIS, where that sort of principle may help. Anyway, turning to my topic, which is dispute resolution, I'll go through it reasonably quickly. But one of the reasons why we thought the dispute resolution might be relevant for a seminar in relation to Abu Dhabi was particularly because some of you may well be aware that there was a change in the structure of arbitration in Dubai, and there's certainly a thought, whether it actually comes off or not, that perhaps Abu Dhabi might find itself as a preferred jurisdiction for arbitration for disputes arising in the UAE rather than in Dubai, and we felt that it was probably worthwhile just going through a few principles to see what would be the position if you chose your contract to be governed by Abu Dhabi law, and then the dispute resolution procedures that might apply in a typical construction contract. So next slide, please. Well, I won't dwell on this, but really the point is that irrespective of where you're working, where your project is, and where you signed your contract, there are shared themes. And the problem, and I always want to emphasize this to clients, and I emphasize it to you as well, is don't be drawn into thinking that the principles and the ideas that you have used in jurisdictions which you're familiar with will necessarily be applicable in Abu Dhabi, because it's just too dangerous to do that. Even though obviously Abu Dhabi is a part of the UAE and it's UAE law that applies, actually it's got its own circumstances, it's got its own core system, it's got nuances which simply won't be the same if previously you've been contracting in Dubai. And the particular points, of course, are then in this the final bullet point there in relation to specific issues, which are the choice of law, language, and then the forms of dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, if what you're looking to do is keep yourself out of the local courts. So put my next slide up, please. So it's always useful just to touch on what would be the default position if you didn't actually have any express provisions relating to dispute resolution in your contract. And the short position is it's going to be the Abu Dhabi Civil Code, it's going to be the Abu Dhabi courts, that's going to be Abu Dhabi procedure, Abu Dhabi enforcement, and obviously it's all going to be in Arabic. Now, for international parties, those of you, of course, who are familiar with the region as a whole will be familiar with some of these issues. But yes, it is worth identifying that if you're in Abu Dhabi and you leave yourself in a situation where you are in the default position, then you may be encountering some issues which are somewhat different from those that you've encountered elsewhere. And particularly in the court system, obviously there are similarities between Dubai and with Abu Dhabi, but I think it's probably fair to say that Abu Dhabi is a rather more conservative place. It's had less of a throughput of international disputes in its court system. And so consequently, that you will find that the Abu Dhabi system is a little bit more conservative in the way in which it might deal with the principles which the Dubai courts have become much more familiar dealing with. I mean, I'm thinking here in particular, I mean, there's one case that came up recently. Some of you may know that if you're looking to incorporate an arbitration clause in your agreement, that UAE law does require that the party signing, or the individual signing the contract on behalf of a company, must have a power of attorney that gives an express right to enter into an arbitration agreement. Now, in the Dubai courts, that there's a certain amount of recognition that this is not particularly helpful in terms of Dubai holding itself out as an international marketplace, because it just, how often has it been the case that simply these powers of attorney haven't included the express provision that I'm referring to? But there's been some recent case law in the Abu Dhabi Court of Cassation, which has suggested that perhaps there is more of a tendency within Abu Dhabi to require this particular point to be complied with. And that's probably something that you could see generally about the Abu Dhabi court system. So next slide, please. But of course, for most of you who are in the construction industry, you'll end up with either a bespoke form of contract, or certainly employers will have their own standard forms, or you'll be working on something that is either a FIDIC contract or a version of a FIDIC contract, sometimes quite heavily amended. But a typical dispute resolution procedure within the FIDIC contract is that which is set out in FIDIC clause 20, and it has the engineer's decisions, a dispute adjudication board, amicable settlement, and then arbitration. And the means by which you make that operate effectively is by completing the appropriate blanks in the appendix to tender. I have said this many times, and I never tire of saying it. It is absolutely key that if you want your dispute resolution process to work properly, pay a little bit of attention to how those component parts, whether it's a FIDIC appendix to tender or some other appendix to tender in another style of contract document, make sure it's filled in properly, because if it's not filled in properly, then potentially you've got a problem where the dispute resolution process falls away completely and you're back to the default position. I mean, one issue that has arisen, and it's one of the reasons why, again, we're talking about Abu Dhabi, is that, of course, a lot of people have got in their contracts, certainly legacy contracts, right up until September of last year, reference to the DIFC LCIA. And you may be aware, obviously, that this was abolished in September. So there's a potential that some courts might take the view that that particular choice of dispute resolution or arbitration may fall away because that organization, that establishment no longer exists. But anyway, that's what I'm saying. Fill in the appendix to tender or whatever is the relevant part in order that your dispute resolution process works properly. Next slide, please. So a typical Abu Dhabi version of what you would get is where you're going to have UAE being the governing law in the Arabic language. There would be the reference to the dispute adjudication board, and then you've got arbitration, and the FIDIC position is usually that you're going to have the ICC, and that would then have the seat, or the sort of the administrative centre for the arbitration being Paris. That of itself is obviously a step, I'm not going to say in the right direction, but it's a step away from the default position. But undoubtedly, there are then going to be complications or certain practical issues about that being the way in which your disputes are going to be heard. First of all, you've got the practicalities of an arbitration being in Paris and the ICC. I make no qualms about saying that the ICC is simply the most expensive form of arbitration in terms of it being administered by the ICC. Often it's unavoidable that you're going to have the ICC because it's what is cascaded down from the head contract, and this is the case in Abu Dhabi as much as it is anywhere else, and you can't avoid it. That may be quite wholly appropriate for a dispute between the employer and the main contractor, but as you go further down the contractual chain, the cost of an ICC arbitration is prohibitively expensive for many subcontractors. In terms of enforceability in Abu Dhabi, an interesting very recent quirk or change has been that there is, in relation to the DAB, the Dispute Adjudication Board decisions, which can become final and binding in Abu Dhabi as elsewhere, there is now, I don't know whether it's actually happened yet, but certainly there was an announcement in March at a major dispute resolution conference in Abu Dhabi that the UAE will be ratifying, and may indeed have ratified, the Singapore Convention. This is a convention which only recently was brought into force. It's a UN convention, and what it will mean is that mediation settlements, and it may well be that it includes also DAB decisions, will be enforced by the UAE courts. What I do say there again, though, is that there may be a reluctance within the UAE to really do this, and we've yet to see whether anybody is needed to bring a case in front of the courts for the purposes of enforcing a mediation settlement. But obviously the parallels there are with what I'm sure you're all very familiar with in relation to arbitration, which is the New York Convention, which the UAE signed up to relatively recently, 2006, I think it was. And those, but the arbitration decisions are definitely going to be enforced in the UAE. There is room to try and avoid it, but there is a recognition both in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and in the other Emirates that there will be enforcement of decisions, both decisions or arbitral awards that have been given within the Emirates, but also external awards, obtained elsewhere, which will then be enforced by the Abu Dhabi courts. Next slide, please. So I just touch here on a couple of alternatives to what we see as the usual, and that would be that you select, and it's often down to the commercial bargaining position of the parties, a law other than UAE law as the governing law of the contract, a language other than Arabic. Obviously, very often that's selected as being English in the Gulf and elsewhere. Potentially, you could get rid of the quite complex provisions relating to a DAB. There's no reason why you have to go through that. It happens to be standard in FIDIC, but it's not something that is a requirement in any jurisdiction, and certainly not in Abu Dhabi. And then finally, as I say, you could potentially choose to get rid of the ICC as the arbitral body and choose one of the two that are available in Abu Dhabi. The one that I list out there first, the ADCAC, or the Abu Dhabi Conciliation and Arbitration Centre, has been around for quite a long time, getting on for 30 years, although it hasn't really progressed in the same way as other arbitration centres. And to a certain extent, I'm not saying it has been overtaken, but there's an element of it being overtaken by a much more recent phenomena, which is the Abu Dhabi Global Market Arbitration Centre, which is tied with the creation of the Abu Dhabi Global Market as a separate legal jurisdiction within Abu Dhabi. Certainly, we would say that given if you've got a project that's in Abu Dhabi, given that there are these two institutions within Abu Dhabi that can quite adequately deal with an arbitration. In fact, funnily enough, the ADGM is linked to the ICC in some way. But I would certainly recommend looking to do that as part of any sort of discussion with your counterparty relating to the content of your dispute resolution clause. Now, let's just check. No more. Oh yes, I've got a few conclusions. Next slide, please. Just to finish off then, so yeah, shared themes and issues. I'm repeating slightly what I said right at the beginning, just to emphasize the point. There's always going to be these shared themes, whether you're in, whatever jurisdiction you're in, but there are dangers by making assumptions about your experience elsewhere. The dispute resolution clauses are usually at the back of the document, not necessarily being looked at by those people involved in the tendering. And my suggestion is just take as a corporate governance issue and as a sort of insurance issue, deliberately on any of your contract negotiations, spend half an hour to 45 minutes considering what the dispute resolution clause is. Even if you can't get out of it, it might be that there's something that you can say to your counterparty, which is to say, maybe there's a little bit of a contradiction, or maybe this is going to be expensive for both of us, or maybe there are things in here that simply we don't need. We could just go straight to arbitration, or maybe the dispute adjudication board process might be a bit more streamlined. Just some suggestions, but spend half an hour at least on. Okay, that's me finished. We're a little bit later than normal, but I think we might have a few questions. If you just bear with me while I'll turn off my camera. I just need to go and check, but you'll still be able to hear me. Let me just check on the questions that have come in. So there's one for Ewan. Ewan, so hold on. So if additional costs are difficult to claim on account of inflation, might it be easier to obtain an EOT on account of the delays arising out of the storage of key materials? I think that is definitely you, Ewan, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Look, you got to go. You'd have to go back into the contract and see if you do get an EOT for lack of availability of materials. I think some FIDIC contracts do allow it for shortages arising out of government actions or epidemic, I think it says. But I suppose as a more general point, in terms of even if the contract doesn't actually give you an EOT entitlement, sometimes you can negotiate and get an ex gratia EOT in some situations. But this way, it's easier to get an EOT than it is to get additional cost.
Okay, and then I know I'm very conscious of time, but we've got one more question, which I think might be to all of us, but I'd probably to be fielded by me, and it's one that we come across all the time, really. I'm slightly paraphrasing the question, and that is obviously so many standard form contracts, and particularly FIDIC, even though it's generated out of Switzerland, is drafted in a very, very common law way. The whole structure of the clauses, the way in which limitations of liability to operate, and then yet there is the possibility, and it's simply by filling out that appendix to tender, that you choose a governing law for the purposes of determining the rights and wrongs in the contract, which is not from a common law tradition. And an obvious example is the UAE law. Hey, this is a topic that is worthy of a webinar of its own. The short point is, and it's what I've said in my slides, is that simply choosing UAE law as the governing law of the contract may well have really significant impacts on the way in which standard FIDIC clauses and clauses drafted in a similar way will operate. The most obvious one has got to be in relation is clause 17.6 in relation to limitations on liability. There may well be means by which that very, very important protection, particularly for a contractor, may be circumvented using UAE law. Other ones relate to conditions precedent. I mean, the FIDIC contract does rely upon certain conditions precedent in relation to bringing claims, or employers often rely upon these. There are definitely arguments under UAE law that which simply wouldn't be available from an English perspective to circumvent those condition precedent claims. So an employer who relies upon a condition precedent clause in the UAE may find themselves with a much more difficult argument to run. I don't know, or Laith, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Not particularly, Andrew. I think you've covered it very well. Anything else from you?
No. That's
I think the other one. Sorry, the other one is limitation periods. There's an opportunity, certainly in the common law, where the parties can agree to reduce limitation periods. And that then goes hand in hand, and it's certainly in a lot of process contracts where you'll have an expressed warranty period, which is often what, 1 or 2 years, maybe as much as 5 years max, for the contractor's liability. Now, that will work in most common law jurisdictions, but certainly in the UAE, there is the decennial liability. Okay, it might be that the decennial liability is in a relatively narrow area, but it could be that despite all of the efforts of the draftsman to limit the contractor's liability for a certain period of time, which is a certain period of time that they're used to in other jurisdictions, actually lurking in UAE law is a potential 10-year liability, which might not have been factored in at all. It's just one of the potential difficulties of doing business in the region. On that note, we're slightly over time, so it remains for me to thank you for attending. I hope you found that interesting. As I've said before, this is very much one of a series. We've been doing this for over 12 months now, covering all of the GCC countries, generally, specifically here in relation to Abu Dhabi with Laith and Ewan based in Abu Dhabi. Me, who's got a sort of roving role, but we've done one out of Qatar, and then particularly in KSA. So please tune in for the next one, and thank you very much for attending. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.